He thought cute would win the room. He didn't see the silence loading behind her eyes.
No yelling.
No table flip. Just one sentence, and suddenly, every man in the chamber forgot how to breathe. That's the day language turned on its master. If one stare silenced the noise, imagine what your pause could mean. Share the silence that spoke, and subscribe to keep moments like this from being erased. The cameras were already rolling. Live. 3 networks. A packed room. One hearing that had gone on too long, but somehow, everyone still knew it was building toward something. The session was supposed to focus on financial discrepancies and the ethical transparency of a former president. That was the official agenda. But the temperature in the room told a different story. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat upright, dressed in cobalt blue with black-framed glasses and her fingers lightly tapping a folder. Her expression wasn't tense, just patient. At her side, seated as a civilian witness, was Arnold Schwarzenegger. No tie. Navy suit. Posture like a marble statue that had seen too many statues fall. His eyes didn't blink much. He'd said almost nothing so far. Across from them, Donald Trump sat leaned back in his chair like it was his 3rd golf swing of the day. He shuffled a few papers he hadn't read, adjusted his cufflink, then looked up slowly, like he'd remembered the cameras were watching and decided to give them what they wanted. He smiled. Or maybe it was a smirk. "You too," he said, waving the edge of his page in their direction. "You two can sit there, look cute, and let the grown-ups clean up your mess." It landed like a glass dropped in church. Not a laugh. Not a murmur. Just stillness. A subtle one. Weightless at first, then it spread across the chamber like fog in a closed room. Crockett didn't speak. She didn't even blink. Arnold turned his head half an inch, just enough to glance at her. No signal. No performance. But the gesture had history inside it. A CNN field producer standing in the back leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "He just said the wrong word. On the record." The chairman didn't gavel. No one asked him to. There was no shouting match to end. No decorum to restore. Just a silence that clung to every lapel, every file folder, every breath that hadn't been taken yet. One aide, midway through typing notes, froze and hovered above her keyboard. Her cursor blinked over the phrase, "Trump response to asset inquiry." She didn't finish the sentence. To anyone unfamiliar, the comment might have sounded like a throwaway line. A jab. A little televised sparring. But to the people in the room, to the viewers old enough to remember other hearings, other moments, it was a word that didn't just sit in the air. It pulled the walls inward. Goo. The word hadn't been accidental. And it hadn't been casual. He knew who he was talking to. He knew what the cameras would capture, a black congresswoman known for precision, and an immigrant icon who'd been governor of the largest state in the country. 2 people whose presence alone defied the shape of the rooms they now occupied. 2 people he could not out-credential. So he used the oldest script in the drawer. Call them cute. Make it sound playful. Undermine without shouting. What he didn't count on, what none of his aides could brief him for, was that neither of them had shown up today to play along. A Fox News commentator would later call the moment harmless banter. But anyone with a long enough memory recognized it for what it was. Not a joke. Not a slip. It was structural language. It was the kind of phrase people use when power feels cornered but wants to stay smiling. When they don't dare say what they mean, so they aim sideways instead. Trump leaned back further in his chair, clearly satisfied. Like someone who believed they'd scored the point no one else had the guts to say out loud. But nothing came back. No smirk from Jasmine. No flinch from Arnold. Only silence. The kind that isn't uncomfortable, it's deliberate. It waits. It listens to the echo of what was just said. And it leaves space for the person who said it to realize they might have misjudged the weight of their own voice. The room was still processing. But the footage? The footage was already alive. Clips were being screen-grabbed and looped before anyone in the chamber stood up. A producer at MSNBC quietly mouthed the words, "Did he really say that?" without even realizing her hand was already reaching for the segment scheduler. A White House correspondent tweeted 5 words, "Cute and silent." Good God. At the far corner of the press gallery, a young man watching on his phone whispered to himself, he picked the wrong ones. Still, no reply had come yet. Jasmine's MIC was right there in front of her. Arnold's hands rested loosely on the table. But that was the thing. This wasn't the part where they answered. This was the part where they let the moment breathe, just long enough for the world to hear exactly how loud quiet can be. Jasmine didn't reach for the MIC. She didn't adjust her glasses. Didn't shift in her seat. She simply looked at him, the man across the table who had said the word, and let the silence finish doing its work. Then, calmly, as if reading from a page she had written years ago and never expected to use, she spoke. "You want us to stay cute and silent," Jasmine said. Her voice was smooth, like cold water running across marble. "That's your idea of control. Mock what you fear and laugh before we answer." Trump blinked once. But it was the people behind him who stopped breathing. "They used to call women emotional," she continued, "to ignore them. Now they call us cute to dismiss us." She paused. Not for effect, but because the words themselves demanded space. "Either way," Jasmine said, eyes never moving from his, "they just renamed the silence they needed." A few heads turned. Even some on his side. Arnold didn't lean in. He didn't raise his chin. He just spoke from where he was, steady, almost quiet. "They called me foreign when they feared what I might prove," he said. His Austrian accent wasn't dulled. If anything, it sharpened each consonant like a deliberate blade. "Now they call me cute when they fear what I already am." The temperature in the chamber dropped. Not theatrically. Not like in a courtroom drama. This was something colder, older, quieter. It felt like the first crack inside a monument. Not loud enough for panic, but undeniable. Something irreversible had started. A senior Senate aide turned to his colleague and whispered, "That wasn't a response. That was an obituary." The microphones caught none of the murmurs. But the cameras caught everything else. The way a GOP strategist 3 rows back slowly shut her laptop. The way a Fox contributor adjusted his tie, then stopped and just stared at the table. And most notably, the way Trump didn't speak. No comeback. No joke. No shrug. Because this wasn't a zinger exchange. It wasn't cable news fodder. This was structural. A shift in tone that audiences feel in their ribcages, not just their timelines. On MSNBC, a legal analyst sat back in her chair and said off-air, she didn't come to debate. She came to write the eulogy. Somewhere in a high-rise office in New York, a podcast producer rewound the live stream 3 times before texting her team, "Pull the full clip. We'll run it cold. No intro. No commentary." A different kind of silence took over now. It wasn't the hush of confusion. It was the kind of silence that comes after a line is drawn, so clean and so deep that nobody wants to cross it because they finally see what was underneath. One congressman on Trump's side, a man known for long-winded filibusters and snide rebuttals, looked briefly at Jasmine and then looked away. Not in shame. In recognition. Later that week, a conservative pundit, one who had publicly mocked Jasmine more than once, would sit on a podcast and say quietly, "For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't watching a performance. I was watching restraint weaponized. And I had no counter for it." But back in the hearing room, no one knew that moment was coming. All they knew was that something had just ended, and not loudly. The language Trump had used, so often designed to sting without blood, had finally miscalculated its target. Cute wasn't just patronizing this time. It had turned the floor beneath him into glass. And he had stepped forward. Arnold folded his hands, said nothing more. Jasmine looked ahead. A single staffer in the corner hit stop recording on her phone. She hadn't planned to upload it. She would later say, "I just didn't want it to disappear." But the clip didn't disappear. It erupted. By midnight, the phrase "renamed the silence they needed" was printed on posters, stitched onto protest banners, and whispered by teachers into lesson plans. By morning, Arnold's line was being quoted not on political talk shows, but in ESL classrooms. And by that afternoon, the hearing was no longer about ethics. It was about a word that didn't expect to be met with history. But it wasn't the words that traveled first. It was the absence. A 12-second pause between Jasmine's reply and the gavel tapping again. That gap, unedited, unscripted, became the most replayed silence in modern congressional history. By midnight, the C-SPAN server had slowed under unexpected load. Not from policy wonks or interns, but from teachers, veterans, mothers, and quietly furious men who had never watched a hearing before. It didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like something older and clearer. The clip hit TikTok just before dawn. Not from a journalist or influencer, but from a fourth-grade girl in Detroit who had screen-recorded it off her mom's phone. She added a voiceover, soft but unwavering. She didn't blink. That's what scared them. The video crossed 2 million views by breakfast. Hashtags bloomed without central coordination. #NotYourCute, #renamed silence, #she didn't blink by noon. The hashtags were no longer trending because they had stopped being tags. They had become language. A way to name a moment people didn't know they'd been waiting for. In a high school in rural Nevada, an English teacher paused mid-lesson. She rewound the clip on her projector and said to her class, This is rhetoric. Not volume. Not rage. This is grammar as a weapon." At a Catholic school in Atlanta, a principal printed Jasmine's quote and taped it outside the chapel doors. They renamed silence. She renamed it back. Reddit exploded, not with politics, but poetry. A meme climbed the front page, Jasmine's still face on one side, the word cute broken into phonetic pieces on the other, annotated like a forensic report. Caption: "Sometimes the wrong word is the right confession." CNN invited body language analysts. Fox tried to ignore it for 12 hours, then ran a segment calling the moment orchestrated theater. But it was too late. The silence had already gone viral. A speech coach on YouTube broke down the pacing of Arnold's delivery, noting that he used a 1-second pause before the phrase "what I already am," turning it into a wait rather than a sentence. A linguistics podcast spliced Jasmine's line into Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 cadence, showing how the sentence structure echoed prophetic cadence, present tense rhythm, parallel syntax, prophetic chill. And then came the sound nobody expected: laughter. Not cruel, not dismissive. Resonant. A quiet, low hum of understanding, heard in comment threads, lunchrooms, and metro platforms. Not comedy laughter. The kind people use when someone else has said exactly what they were thinking and never dared phrase. Somewhere in Tulsa, a grandmother watching with her grandson shook her head and said, "She didn't answer for herself. She answered for the rest of us." Even those on the other side, or what they thought was the other side, started to feel the floor shift. In a podcast recorded 2 days later, a conservative commentator known for years of disdain toward Jasmine Crockett surprised his co-host by going off script. "I didn't agree with her politics," he said. "Still don't. But that wasn't politics. That was something else. That was someone refusing to flinch in a room built to make her disappear." He paused. "For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't watching a performance. I was watching restraint weaponized. And I had no counter for it. It wasn't a confession. It was a moral rupture. A seam opening not in belief, but in reflex. The room had broken. And no one knew how to put it back. Church groups played the clip. Women's shelters wrote new workshop curriculums using it as a case study in language and power. A college debate coach told his team, "This is how you answer without asking permission." By day 3, the phrase renamed silence had become a printable symbol. By day 5, someone stitched it into a flag and flew it over a university quad. And still, Jasmine hadn't posted a single thing. Arnold hadn't granted a single interview. Because that wasn't the play. The play had already been made. And the sound that followed wasn't victory music. It was something quieter. The sound of a wound refusing to close because, for once, it had been named. The memory didn't arrive as nostalgia. It returned like a cough in a quiet church, sharp, involuntary, loud in its wrongness. Jasmine hadn't thought of that day in years. 16, barely old enough to park a car alone, yet standing in that county courthouse like she belonged to something more permanent than youth. It was supposed to be a shadowing exercise. Students watched, took notes, maybe asked polite questions afterward. But that morning, a docket error, or divine mischief, placed her next to a panicked immigration lawyer who hadn't expected his junior associate to quit that morning. A boy had been brought in. 11. Eyes like quiet verdicts. No translator.
No advocate.
The lawyer shoved a file into her lap. Sit behind me, don't talk, and look useful. But when the judge asked if there was anyone who could speak for the child's character, the room shifted. Everyone looked elsewhere. Down. Away. The boy looked at her. She stood. Not a speech. Just a sentence. And a name. His. The defense attorney chuckled before she could finish. Sweetheart, he said, smirking at the judge, this is real law, not a school play. It landed hard. Everyone laughed, except the boy. Jasmine Saturday. She didn't blink then, either. Instead, she took a pen from her pocket, turned over the back of the court's witness form, and wrote the line down, this is real law, not a school play. 2 months later, when she was invited to help draft a supplemental brief for that same case on procedural grounds, she asked to write the opening. She began with his words. This is real law, not a school play, he said. Good. Because the stakes are real. And so is the silence that let that line pass unchallenged. Years later, she kept that transcript in a frame. Not because it was her first win, she didn't win that one. But because it taught her that some rooms weren't waiting for answers. They were waiting for someone not to flinch. Arnold had a version of it, too. Different country. Different weight. He was 19. Vienna. Last round of auditions for a European war drama. He'd trained the lines for weeks. Perfect pacing. Clipped tone. Stoic jaw. The casting director didn't lift his head from the portfolio. With that accent, the man muttered, no one will let you play a lead. Arnold didn't argue. Didn't fight. He simply nodded, turned, then looked back once. No longer performing, no longer acting. That's fine, he said. I'll play someone they never forget instead. He didn't get the part. But 5 years later, when he crossed the Atlantic with only 2 phrases of English and a fire lit by rejection, that memory followed him. Not as shame, but as architecture. Every time he was told he was too thick-tongued to host, too stiff to act, too foreign to lead, he didn't correct them. He just waited. And when the camera rolled, he showed them someone they'd remember without subtitles. Jasmine and Arnold never traded those memories. Not in words. But that morning, after the hearing, when the hallway cameras had shut off and aides whispered about spin strategies and podcast angles, they walked side by side through the marble corridor. He glanced over once. You ever write that line down? He asked. She nodded. Framed it, she said. Yours. He gave half a smile. Etched it. They didn't need more. Because what had just happened wasn't new. It had just been televised. And the reason it pierced so deep was because millions of people had their own version of cute, of sweetheart, of no one will let you. Some had written them down. Some had buried them. But now, because of a silence, a stare, and 2 voices that never raised themselves, those memories were rising. And they weren't leaving this time. The meeting room wasn't spinning yet. But it was starting to creak. 3 hours after the hearing, inside a closed-door debrief with Trump's senior communications team, the temperature had shifted. Not in volume, in posture. Less swagger. More glances. One aide stared at the playback again, lips pressed, remote in hand. She never raised her voice, he muttered. She didn't even lean forward. Another scrolled Twitter. The trending bar hadn't moved. Still. #renamed silence. #not your cute. #room didn't blink. The strategist in charge, a man who once ran presidential debate prep like military drills, took off his glasses. Cleaned them once. Said nothing. Then finally, to the room, this won't fade. Trump scoffed. She's a nobody. A guest star. People forget. But the strategist didn't look up from the notes. Just spoke again, softer. She didn't fight. She calibrated. That word lingered. Calibrated. Not emotional. Not aggressive. Not even assertive. Precise. Like a lens adjusted to make the background collapse. Outside the room, reporters were already assembling evening segments. Inside the Capitol, in a hallway far from the cameras, an older Republican congressman closed the manila folder on his lap. No statement.
No cámara.
Just a whisper to his aide, "We can't keep defending this." She didn't yell. He did. Then he stood. Slowly. Like something had shifted weight inside his spine. He didn't say Jasmine's name. But the silence around it said everything. Across the country, in a studio north of Atlanta, a political podcast team adjusted their schedule. A guest had requested a last-minute slot. Not just any guest, Harlan Bishop, former Reagan speechwriter, Fox contributor, known for his brutal takedowns of performative progressivism. The producer raised an eyebrow. Is he coming to bury her again? But when Harlan arrived, he didn't carry notes. He didn't even sit at the mic the usual way. Just placed his phone down, pressed his palms together, and waited. The host tried to ease him in. "All right, Harlan. You've seen the clip. You've sparred with her politics before. What did you make of this morning's moment?" A pause. Then Harlan looked at the camera. And broke pattern. "I wasn't watching a performance," he said quietly. A long silence. Then, "I was watching Restraint, Weaponized." He blinked. Once. And I had no counter for it. Even the host didn't fill the space. No follow-up. Just the hum of recording equipment picking up the sound of a man shifting inward. That 30-second segment, unedited, was clipped and shared by a centrist account with the caption, "When the wall cracks, it doesn't shout. It just no longer holds." By morning, the clip had passed 3 million views. No sound effects.
No montage.
Just a man once paid to tear women like Jasmine apart, quietly confessing he couldn't find an angle. Not because she out-argued them. Because she outlasted the frame. In classrooms, some teachers paused lesson plans to show the clip, not of the hearing, but of Harlan's face. One wrote on the whiteboard, "Weaponized restraint." Then underlined it. Twice. In staff meetings at media outlets, younger producers started to whisper phrases they never dared before. Did she just redefine calm? She didn't flip the table. She held it still and let them shake. She stayed inside the rules, and made the rules look small. By day's end, another whisper had begun, not viral yet, but growing. They didn't lose the argument. They lost the room. And no one could point to the moment it happened. Because the wall didn't collapse. It cracked, quietly, cleanly, from inside. It began with a question. In a living room in Des Moines, Iowa, a fourth-grade girl sat curled on the couch beside her mother, tablet in hand. She'd been watching the clip again, the one where the man in the dark suit told the two leaders to sit and look cute. At first, she didn't understand why her mom had gone quiet. But that night, after brushing her teeth, after curling into her blanket, she whispered, "Mom, when will they call me cute so I don't get listened to?" The words landed without sound. The mother didn't respond at first. She didn't reach for words, she reached for her phone. Found the clip. Played the moment Jasmine Crockett raised her eyes but not her voice. She held her daughter close. Didn't explain. Just pressed her lips to her temple and let the silence speak louder. That single moment, filmed and uploaded by the girl's older cousin, caught flame. Not from anger. From recognition. In Ohio, a teacher replayed the clip for her fifth period class. Afterward, one student simply asked, why did it feel like she was telling the truth, without trying to win? In Mississippi, a librarian printed Jasmine's words and pinned them beside the checkout counter. They used to call women emotional to ignore them. Now they call us cute to dismiss us. Either way, they just renamed the silence they needed. In California, a barista wrote it on a chalkboard usually reserved for latte specials. She said more people took photos that day than bought drinks. At a university leadership forum in Chicago, Arnold stepped onto the stage not as an actor, not as a politician, but as a man watching an old strategy collapse. He didn't begin with applause lines. He began with a pause. Then, simply, Power isn't loud. It just counts on us staying silent. He let the line hang. Didn't rush the silence that followed. Then added, they tried to reduce her. Not with facts. With adjectives. That phrase, adjectives, echoed later that night. Because as Jasmine Crockett was leaving the Capitol, a reporter asked if she had planned her response. She didn't stop. Just smiled slightly. If you want to control the narrative, she said, you start with the adjectives. It was subtle. Understated. But by the next morning, the phrase was printed on T-shirts in Atlanta. Then hoodies in Detroit. Then canvas bags in Portland. Within 72 hours, variations appeared in 37 states. Not sponsored. Not mass-produced. Grassroots silk screens. Teen artists on Etsy. Educators printing them for rallies. Even a silent protest at a debate stage. 5 women, arms crossed, all in black, the quote on their backs in white block letters. In Texas, a retired journalist posted a photo of herself holding her granddaughter. Caption, I was called feisty in 1981 for asking a question. Today, she just asked me one I couldn't answer. She included the question, when will they call me that to make me stop? No pundit had a reply. They tried to pivot. Tried to reframe. But this wasn't a debate anymore. It was a wound being named. In a studio in New York, a well-known anchor paused mid-segment, visibly moved. I've hosted 1,000 interviews, she said. But I don't remember silence ever feeling this loud. The silence wasn't absence. It was resistance. In schools, Jasmine's clip was now part of classroom media literacy lessons. In churches, her calm was mentioned beside sermons on dignity. And in a handwritten letter taped to a school hallway in Kansas, a 10-year-old wrote, she didn't shout. But I still heard her. The question kept echoing. From daughter to mother. From student to teacher. From generation to generation. And no one had answered it yet. Because the answer wasn't verbal. It was being written, quietly, steadily, by every woman who refused to shrink into an adjective. The room was quieter now. Not because things had settled. But because something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. Jasmine Crockett stood near the marble steps outside the Capitol. The wind pressed the fabric of her blazer gently against her spine. The cameras were still there, still circling. But they weren't chasing a soundbite anymore. They were waiting for a verdict. A reporter, younger than most, leaned forward, uncertain but bold. Do you want an apology? He asked. It was the question everyone else had circled but never dared land. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice came low, even, with no trace of performance. I don't want apologies from men who mock me in public, she said. Then she paused, not for effect, but for weight. I want apologies from the silence that lets them. There it was. No shout.
No eslogan.
Just a scalpel. The clip was streamed by millions. Again. This time, not for the confrontation, but for what remained after it. In a classroom in Vermont, a teacher paused the video just after Jasmine's words. She didn't ask the class what they thought. She asked, "What do you feel?" A boy in the back said, like she hit the floor no one wanted to admit we're standing on. Halfway across the country, in a community center in Arizona, Arnold Schwarzenegger was being interviewed after a leadership summit. He was calm, reserved, hands folded. The moderator asked, "What do you think the legacy of that moment will be?" Arnold looked down, just for a second, as if considering the gravity of how history moves, not by laws, but by glances that stop time. Then, slowly, deliberately, as if writing something final, history never punished men for calling women cute. He looked up. But it remembers the day someone finally answered without blinking. The room didn't clap. Not right away. Because applause would have broken something sacred in the silence. The moment landed, not loud, but deep. In high schools, that quote showed up in yearbooks. On bulletin boards. In speeches by students who had never watched C-SPAN before in their lives. One student, a 17-year-old girl from Michigan, ended her final essay in English class with a single sentence, "If I'm ever called cute in the wrong room, I'll remember her pause before she answered. Her teacher asked if she wanted to revise. She shook her head. No. That's the whole point. The clip of Jasmine's response was now used in debate teams, not for technique, but for restraint. The viral t-shirts with her quote now included a second line beneath, smaller, in grey. They renamed silence. She renamed it back. The cultural ripple wasn't rage. It was refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to comply. Refusal to let the framing go unchallenged. And Jasmine never once raised her voice. In Los Angeles, a college professor posted side-by-side clips. One of past congressional hearings where women were interrupted, laughed at, diminished. Then Jasmine's. Caption: history didn't turn when the volume went up. It turned when the gaze didn't lower. In that same week, a conservative columnist, known for snide remarks and carefully coded dismissals, published a rare op-ed titled "I Didn't See It Until She Didn't Blink." He ended the piece with a confession: she didn't demand respect. She expected it. And that's what unnerved me most. Even those who tried to spin the moment found themselves without footing. There was no backlash that could land on her tone. No misquote they could use. No smile they could twist. Because the story wasn't about anger. It was about architecture. About how one word, cute, revealed the scaffolding that had quietly held the ceiling of power in place. And how one woman, with a single gaze, cracked it, not with a hammer, but with stillness. The closing shot came from an unlikely source. A French documentary team doing a series on American civic life had captured it. Jasmine, post-interview, sitting alone in a back hallway of the Capitol. No makeup crew, no team around her. Just her. Looking ahead. Not angry. Not exhausted. Just clear. The frame held steady on her face. Her expression didn't move. But watching it, viewers around the world reported the same strange feeling, like they were being asked a question, without words. Like they were the ones being examined. As if she was looking at them, not at Trump. And somehow, it made them want to answer better. The final caption of the documentary read, "Some lines echo. This one won't fade." Because it wasn't a line. It was a mirror. And somewhere in that silence, America realized, the word that broke the room didn't come from him. It came from what she refused to let him take.